the true performance is awakening at the cellular level. Okay, it is inside out. And once you get that connection, you connect mind to muscle, we connect what you're thinking and doing to how you're doing it and you're moving. That's when you actually starts to work.
Welcome to the True Performance Podcast, where we're about to embark on a journey that reshapes the very foundations of deep health. I'm Matt Dawkins, and today we're going to pull back the curtain on the genesis of true performance. I'm sitting down with the legends here, Dr. David Brown, Dean Bozzano, and get ready to discover the birth of a coaching revolution. All right, champs. You guys have your Wheaties this morning? I'm thinking about what do champions eat for breakfast every morning?
Well, there's a good way to start off the conversation. Let's hope
is it avocado
toast,
or is it Wheaties, or is it 17 eggs? I feel like you need 20 eggs a day, Dr. Brown, to keep up with those arms.
No, if it matters what the total protein protocol is, but I like to diversify my macros.
Respect. I mean, there's only two options for breakfast, right? Eggs and bacon.
Dr. Brown is your worst nightmare if you're a parent. Because
that's right.
If you were raising a kid like him, the amount of food that you'd have to feed to fuel him, not only is he a tall guy, but because he works out and he's a much larger man than normal, you got to fuel all that growth too. And kids eat a lot just as it is. And I can't imagine trying to fuel, a young boy. Having 5 girls, I never had that problem.
They don't. But see, I grew up in a family of 6, and I'm the small one.
Really?
Jeez. Your poor mother.
I'm just thinking like for most people, there's like the mortgage payment, then there's like maybe investments or saving, and then there's groceries. Dr. Brown's house is like groceries, then groceries, then mortgage. Listen, we're going to get into it. We're going to get into the genesis. Today we're going to talk about true performance. And so let's get started with this. So how did it all begin? Let's unravel the backstory, the aha moments, and the driving force behind this transformational coaching system. And what I want to do is I want to give our listeners a reason to even finish this podcast episode. So Dean, we're going to go first with you, and Dr. Brown will go with you next. Give us a little bit of your backstory. Talk about, education and experience, and let's get into the genesis.
Well, the genesis of the system itself is about 20 years at this point, in which it kind of came to me that we needed to change some things in terms of our health. And it really came from the first couple decades of my life that I spent in business. I was in consulting for about a decade, and then in private equity, venture capital for about a decade. And one of the things I noticed is that I started embracing health at an early age, back when I was a teenager. And I started weightlifting when I was very young, and I started wrestling in high school and into college before I realized that my talents were not good enough to be beating myself up and trying to cut weight back at a time when people didn't know how to cut weight and did it dangerously. And I really need to focus on my academic skills. So I had come out of college with business degrees, later went back and got a master's degree in business, and was very busy all the time, flying around the country, working on different opportunities, and always finding it a huge challenge to stay healthy, when you're eating out all the time and you're not getting a chance to exercise, you're drinking too much alcohol. It was always a constant battle. But for me, you'd find me in the gym no matter what hotel I was in around the country every morning. I'd be there between 5 and 6 a.m. and trying to eat as best I could when I was out. So it really was after my stint in the venture capital world that I decided to get off the hamster wheel, if you will, of running around the country and doing all kinds of things. That I wanted to kind of stay in one place and focus my efforts. I had been in martial arts since I was out of college, and practicing a lot of different health and fitness routines. constantly for decades, and wanted to try my hand at going into the health and fitness business and bringing my business acumen and a strong bent on technology that I had developed over the decades into that business that I thought 20 years ago was it was rare to see anything like that. So we were one of the first entities to actually create a website for a gym. We opened up a gym and performance clinic. And we were one of the first gyms that actually had health and nutritional coaching. So, when you go back 20 years in this industry, and actually even more now, maybe 23, 24 years, it was pretty prehistoric. I mean, we're talking before CrossFit, before all these, things that have come up today. There was basically big box gyms and that was it. So we were a small box gym, and we started developing systems and technologies related to actually developing a path, a system, a framework to take somebody from A to B to C to D in terms of their health. So I developed a framework around something called Six Sigma. For many of our listeners, they may not know what that is, but for many of them that are in the business field, Six Sigma has been around since the 80s. It was developed by Motorola, made famous by GE. It's a multi-billion-dollar consulting industry at this point. But essentially what it is at its core, it's a framework for solving problems. It is a well-known, scientifically valid framework for determining what the core of the problem is and how to go about solving that problem, and then how to go about, after it's been solved, controlling it so it doesn't reoccur again. And that is really the framework I used to develop what I thought was lacking in the health and fitness industry, which is a system to get from A to B to C to D.
So you have, coming up an athlete, and then early on, maybe teenage adult years, overcoming some of your own personal challenges with health, finding a way through, using that not just to solve your own problems, but to transform other people's lives, spending years consulting, using the Six Sigma formula, which we're going to talk about how that's folding into true performance.
Yep.
To here we are today. Fantastic. You mentioned cutting weight, and I thought about, I wrestled when I was in high school, and I remember the days of I got to lose 10 pounds in 2 days, and
yep.
Sometimes it was 8 pounds in 1 day, yep. And I've got trash bags on, and I'm playing basketball, and I'm smelling pizza and doing push-ups. You can't eat, you can't drink.
Trust me, that's still alive and well in professional fighting today, UFC, whatever. I think that's a topic for another podcast, because we've worked with a lot of UFC and Bellator fighters that's still alive and well. It's just been pulled out of the wrestling, high school wrestling format. But anyway, just to wrap it up, when I decided to get into this industry, if you will, I decided to go back to school, work on my pre-med program. So I did an entire pre-med program, and then a master's in physiology. So I wanted to get some scientific background that I could then use and add to this business and technology background that I had, to try to see if I could come up with something that would, I hate to call it revolutionize the industry, because you never really come out of there thinking, you don't know that you're going to revolutionize anything, but you're hoping that you create something that catches fire and other people want to use. And so far we've had a little bit of that.
So Dr. Brown, let's get to the other half here. You and I have had this conversation before, and I feel like I could have written a book of accolades and certifications and licenses and education and all the things that you've done. But humor me, humor us. Let's let our listeners know. Give us your backstory, Dr. Brown, and then, if you don't mind, once you in 72 minutes, when you're done sharing your backstory, give us a little insight about how the two of you got connected, because we definitely want to know that as well.
Getting to the backstory, I hate that question. All I know is my background is very diverse,
For sure.
But it all plays together right now. So it all comes into what we're trying to accomplish and why. High school athlete, high level, recruited into college for multiple sports, played college sports, went into the military, worked, did a lot of stuff while I was there. for as far as physical fitness, law enforcement. I went into law enforcement. According there, I became a subject matter expert in physical fitness, where I continue to study things, study the human body, how it works, how we make it practical. For the most part, the big thing is I'm a real big guy about processes and frameworks and taking things from the science and making it practical for everyday use. Okay. And that's what it comes down to. So I like to actually make sure I study stuff to make sure we're using it and using it correctly. So going back to what Dean was saying real quick, and that's how we got connected with Dean having a Six Sigma, because I do have a business background as well. I've been a CEO, director of large organizations, even up to $1.5 billion organizations, having tried to run them with some 2,000 people. A lot of things that I was dealing with, they weren't talking about. I know things weren't right. My background in exercise and physiology and business, I needed to be put together. So when I actually started coaching, Olympic lifting and strength conditioning for high school kids, because I wanted to make sure they got it done right, because I didn't have that access, right? Going back when we were talking about doing stuff with our coaches, they didn't have the scientific background. They was putting stuff together that worked for them, but every athlete's different. And so they're missing a customization. I feel like, I was cheated. So I wanted to fix that issue first, and then develop athletes right. Then actually look into the industry. There's other things going on, and I'm unapologetically going to call them out. There's a lot of people out there doing stuff. They're well-meaning, but they're uneducated. They don't have the foundational work to sit there and do and pull the science in. They're just sitting there repeating after somebody else, but they don't know how to read the research. They don't know how to do the research and make sure it's applying to that particular person, right? And that's where the framework of the Six Sigma comes in place, okay? And even then, people start listening to the wrong expert. You got doctors sitting there talking about exercise. That's not their job. You got physical therapists out there going to try to get into sports strength conditioning. That's not their job. I mean, you got people crossing over and scope creeping all over the place when we should be coming together as a team, right? And then you have the frameworks. And that's what I put together when I actually created the 5 competencies of performance science, and we're running it with the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And then I got to present on that at the International Olympic Committee 2 years ago. That's what it's about, right? It just goes through the steps because it's a framework. And Dean thinks the exact same way as I do, and the Six Sigma process fit right in. But then I also added to it, because now when you talk about functional medicine and you talk about metabolism, people are only looking by what they get. Just a big reference that I want to get to. For instance, you know why your doctor only pulls TSH in their blood work? That's the main one they get to.
Why's that?
First of all, it's because that's where the insurance is going to reimburse. Second of all, when they actually look at thyroid, they're going to give you a Synthroid or something to get to it. But the TSH is how they're measuring and how much thyroid and how that's working. Although the thyroid actually has multiple areas inside of it that you got to talk about. Okay. I mean, you got to look at TPO, you got to look at Hashimoto's, you got to look at the cortisol, you got to look at, and exercise, nutrition, diet all play a role on how that's going to work. But they're not looking at it individually. Now you actually have a plan to actually go through and fix it, and you start putting that into action, and then you control. So you want to take it from a short-term goal to a long-term and make it lifestyle. And that's what we teach you to do. But we eliminate a lot of the waste that comes into it, and therefore you're getting faster results, more efficient results, and safer results. And they're going to be geared towards you as an individual.
Besides the fact that Dr. Brown being a PhD in the health sciences and myself being in the health sciences, we both ran and operated not only businesses, but gyms, performance centers, clinics. I have 20 years of actually dealing with the headaches of brick and mortar. So we understand how hard it is sometimes to apply science in the field, in application. And, these podcasts are in the field. Sometimes you can't apply the technology like you think you can.
Respect. Well, I'm sitting here thinking about, you used the word revolution. I think I might have used it first, but every revolution has a starting point. True performance is no exception. I am listening to you guys and all the vision and expertise. It wasn't just a moment. It's really been a culmination. And as we're talking about how this thing is fleshing out to really serve people and transform lives, Dean, I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about the journey from ideation to creation. We've already gotten into the Six Sigma model. Ultimately, I want to know, and I think our listeners want to know, what sparked the idea of creating another coaching system inside of what some people would call an already saturated market?
I can answer that really simply. Up until around the late 90s, 2000, the market was saturated with the same thing. It was the big box concept that is, we take your money, we try to make it an amount of money that you're willing to pay every month, and we let you loose on the gym floor to do whatever you want to do, in which most people came in, got intimidated, went to the treadmill for 15, 20 minutes, and left. So it was obvious that model didn't produce a high level of health, or what we call deep health now. But and I think that is about the time that organizations like CrossFit started to come in, because they also saw that there was opportunity to do things differently. Now, I'm not necessarily an advocate of CrossFit. I'm not against it. It's just that it has its purpose, and it has its curve as to how it works, and what it's good for, and how long you can do it, and how you need to change it up for different reasons. We'll get into some future point in time, but that point period in the early 2000s was, I think, a pivotal point for the industry in general. And it's when we started to bring back smaller health and fitness centers. And I think that was the first step, is you needed to get smaller in order to get to a more intimate level of health and connection with the actual coach, trainer, whoever it might be. And that was kind of the first step of this whole ideation, is what do we need to do from a physical perspective to get to this point. We're not going to reach people to give them a framework to discuss a system that, to make changes, unless we can get more intimate with them. So myself, right about the same time, CrossFit was discovering some of these things, we opened up a small clinic, in which health and nutrition was part of the fitness center right out of the box. So the day that you started, you were already getting coaching and being put into systems to do things like lifestyle habits, nutritional habits, supplementation habits, along with your exercise, in order to increase the results that you were going to be getting. And we were doing testing and assessments back then. And we really used the health center, if you will, and the clinic as a research ground to gather data. And we gathered enough data. We've done thousands of metabolic tests. We've done several thousand body compositions and different things like that, thousands of surveys. And we started to develop a body of data that we're able to use as a prototype to create a lot of the algorithms and formulas that we put into this Six Sigma framework. And at that time, we called it Six Sigma Fitness, but it's essentially a Six Sigma framework that had our proprietary algorithms that we use to analyze, measure, and analyze the data that was coming in. So that really was the genesis was big box gym, no intimacy, no connection, and no integration of diet, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle habits. None of that was integrated into the lifestyle of the individual. So we started the smaller box gyms, and we started the clinics, and we started the programs to put those together right out of the box. They weren't in the same state that they are today, where we have these systems and frameworks, but we were starting to build them back then.
Right on. Anything to add to that, Dr. Brown?
My whole big thing about it was, I have this big thing about, as I started saying before, people thinking that exercise and nutrition can be done by a monkey. It's just something you can just do, and everybody can get out there and do it. So they think they can just take this weekend or even a 4-hour certification and actually think they're professionals. To me, that's no better than sleeping at the Holiday Inn Express and thinking you're going to go do brain surgery. However, the American population here in the Western, they've actually think that's okay. So who's actually out there who's actually practicing, who's actually out there giving us information, and it's causing all kind of issues. But the general public doesn't care. They're like, oh, I got results. I got this. I got that. Great. But you're going to see me eventually, because I'm telling you, you're being broken down. Wolf's Law is a son of a gun, right? And it will catch up to you. And if you don't know what Wolf's Law means, everything has a breaking point. So if you're not setting it right and you're doing intermediate type of mechanics, it's going to break on you.
Yeah. Let me just say this, because I think the fitness industry is flooded with misinformation. I think everybody is an expert now. To your point, maybe they just stayed in the Holiday Inn Express last night, but anyone that has a platform, has a microphone, and a lot of them are willing to start the conversation with, I'm not a fitness expert, but, and then they take advantage of their million followers, or maybe they're a celebrity who did a specific diet, and all of a sudden they're scientists. As we're talking about true performance, it really is intended, I know, to cut through the noise and cut through the chaos and make sure that we're closing the gap where there are so many half-truths. We're closing the gap so people know the whole story. What are some of the ways that this system is going to help people understand the whole story and get all the information they need to get true transformation? How is true performance separating itself from the rest of those in the industry?
Well, let me start off by saying, so first of all, we're taking information that we're using that you see for people in Hollywood and people like, how they get in shape so fast, or we're using for our elite level athletes. They're like, look at that person, look how long they're lasting, look how much they're doing this kind of stuff. You can even look at and see how long now that professional athletes are staying in the industry versus what they did even 10 years ago. That's because the science improving, their exercising is improving, but they're getting coaches. They're not the ones doing it. People are figuring out what's going through them, and they're going through a system like the Six Sigma framework, where they're defining what they're trying to do. They're getting measured. They're being analyzed. They're doing improvement factors, and then they're learning to control it over their lifespan, right? So that's what's being done. Not to mention, these athletes are also, in their mindset, how they think about stuff is getting done. But the fact of the matter is, they're getting the right information that is custom to them at the high level. Mm-hmm. That's where it's coming from. You're not seeing that. Everybody trying to act like they can do it, but they're not. Even the athletes themselves that come out, when they get done, all of a sudden they're like, I'm a professional athlete. I made it to the league. Let me coach you. Only thing they can coach you on is what worked for them.
Right. Yep.
Right. I think what we're getting to here, and what we'll be talking about in future podcasts, is that obviously the world's moving forward. ChatGPT showed us that artificial intelligence is taking over, many things that were done previously in a different way. And our system actually 10 years ago, when we started developing it, had a form of artificial intelligence, what we called automated intelligence, very similar, because we put together our own little ecosystem of body and knowledge. But the future practitioner for health and fitness isn't going to be the person that's just on the floor, coaching. That might be important to get people motivated and moving. But the real practice of health and fitness starts in the office. It really starts, and today it starts behind a computer quite often with the we could call it a patient if we were practicing medical, if we had a medical practice, but in this case, the client. But just like a doctor has to examine the patient and has to use the knowledge that they have, the knowledge base that's given to them in computer systems, and has to do testing and all that, health and fitness is no different. It's just a practice with a client that's in front of you that you've got to talk to, that you've got to examine, that you've got to test, you got to assess, you got to use your scientific knowledge base. Then from there, you can determine what they need to do when they leave that office. And that's where then the exercise and all things come in. And what Dr. Brown was saying about some of the people out there and the influencers and people that don't know what they're doing, they're not doing any of this. There's your first signal. They may be doing an Instagram video, but they're not doing any of this.
Right. I think, a couple of takeaways from what you guys just said. Number one is, I think about how is this coaching system differentiating itself? Well, first, you have a mountain of education between the two of you. In addition to that, you have a ridiculous amount of experience. So you have worked with Olympic athletes, you have worked with celebrities, you have worked with mega business leaders, you've worked with people in every walk of life, and now you're bringing the experience and the education to this platform. But in addition to that, what you just said, Dean, is you're saying we're not done learning. We're not done, we don't know everything there is to know. We're a platform that's going to continue the process of learning and getting better.
Right.
So every day getting better. Talk about Chat GPT and its implementation and how that's changed things. You're not just, there's no fear in this platform of new concepts and new ideas. In fact, it all runs through the filter to potentially become a best practice inside of this platform. And so I love that about this platform. As I'm thinking about future episodes as well, we're going to get into the weeds. Today, we spent a lot of time talking conceptually. We spent a lot of time in the clouds talking about true performance and Six Sigma fitness. And in future episodes, we're going to get into the weeds because we want you to know, what does it look like for a client to come through this process? What does it look like for a gym to adopt this process, and what the success that it can bring? We're going to get into that. But what I want to do for now for you guys is I want people to know what we want them to take away from this episode. So as you're thinking about Dr. Brown, Dean, the things that you guys shared, what are some of the things that you want to make sure that people take away from episode 1 of the True Performance Podcast?
Well, this has been a broad brush, and you're not really going to understand totally what we're talking about until we get into the weeds a little bit in future podcasts. But this is about changing the way that you look at working with a client in developing health and fitness. If what you love to do is to be on the floor just coaching people, motivating them, getting them going, that's a different job. This is a job of what we call a practitioner. And a practitioner starts his job in an office environment, and eventually it leads to all the other things that happen, whether it's nutrition and cooking and all the other things that are always fun to do. But it really starts, in a clinical environment. And the focus that we're going to be discussing is that we are looking at fitness from the inside out. Most health and fitness coaches, trainers out there, they look at fitness from the outside in, and so do most consumers, most clients. In other words, I want to reduce my belly. I want to increase my biceps. We're looking from the outside in. So most personal trainers are going to give them an outside in approach, but they didn't get heavy, nor did they lose muscle tissue because of outside in. They lost it because of inside out. What do I mean by that? They became sedentary. That changed their insulin responses to, glucose. So suddenly they can't eat as much sugar, carbohydrates, that they used to anymore. And the fact that they can't eat as much anymore causes them to gain weight. Well, how do we reverse that process? How do we, some coaches naturally, intuitively know that you need to reduce sugar, you need to reduce carbohydrates. Other coaches may naturally know, but not really practice the science behind it, that by doing certain physical activities, we can increase the metabolic intake of glucose so that we're actually using it to store energy as opposed to gain fat. But we're in the evaluation, the assessment, and the clinical, we're looking at all those, what happened inside of you to cause you to get to where you're at right now, and how we're going to reverse what's happening inside of you by doing external things, by eating different, sleeping different, all that. But how are we going to reverse what's happening inside of you so that we can take that weight off, so we can put that muscle on, so we can give you more energy and less fatigue, so you can be sharper and have better mental acuity. Those are all internal chemical components that you need to reverse to actually get to true health. How you do it? By eating better, sleeping better, living better, moving better. Those are the tools that we'll talk about, but that isn't the primary focus.
Incredible. Thank you. Dr. Brown, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so we're talking about the whole thing we're looking at. So for the most part, you're looking at it in components. So to me, it comes in like three dimensions, right? You have mindset, movement, and recovery, right? Typically, outside of mindset, movement, recovery, when you talk about even the metabolism, like where Dean's talking about the inside. So we do believe that true performance is awakening at the cellular level. Okay, it is inside out. And once you get that connection, you connect mind to muscle, we connect what you're thinking and doing to how you're doing it and you're moving. That's when you actually starts to work, right? So for instance, use the three dimensions of metabolism, like your body's made to be building, burning, breaking down. But even more specifically, it responds to activities and environmental signals to shift between anabolic and catabolic modes. And that also goes into when you actually look at metabolism, you have your caloric factor and then you have your stress factors, right? So as we're talking about, here are the things you're doing to actually move the caloric aspect, but here's also the things that's going on inside your body that's not allowing it to actually activate. How are the cells working? How is it connecting? What are your micronutrients and macronutrients are doing? How's your mindset preventing you from actually taking those actions and believing what you're doing, believing what you're getting done and then moving forward with it, right? So the mindset, movement, recovery are all big aspects to that. And this is where we get into it to achieve the true performance.
So obviously, if you're listening to this right now, you are realizing that, whether you're a gym owner, you're a high-level business leader, you're a successful person, you're an elite athlete, this is going to be a podcast where you can tune in and listen to these two geek out when it comes to true performance. So I'm looking forward to watching this one back, honestly, and I'm looking forward to future episodes. I want to say something as we get ready to sign off, something you heard Dean and Dr. Brown say, that true performance is awakened at the cellular level. And when we connect mind and muscle, transformation happens. And so thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dean, for being on the episode. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the next episode.